My father didn't even have a casket. That's the first thing I remember after he died. Not a eulogy, not the church, not the sea of black clothes. Just the fact that we couldn't afford a box to put him in. He was cremated in a cardboard sleeve, and my mother, Evelyn, kept his ashes in a plastic tub on top of the fridge for 3 months. I was 11 years old, and I used to stand on my tiptoes in the middle of the night to touch the cold plastic, just to feel close to him. I didn't know then that my mother was already planning her escape. I thought she was grieving. I thought we were grieving together. I was wrong. My father, Daniel, was a carpenter, not the kind with a fancy workshop, the kind who built decks and fences for rich people in the suburbs. He came home every night with sawdust in his hair and glue on his fingers, and he'd lift me onto his shoulders even when he was exhausted. He called me his little foreman. My mother worked part-time at a pharmacy, but mostly she stayed home and watched soap operas. I didn't realize until later that she was already unhappy. She just hid it well. When the cancer came, it was fast, pancreatic, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the day he died. I remember him trying to teach me how to hammer a nail in the garage the week before he went into the hospital. His hands were shaking. He missed the nail twice and laughed it off, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He knew. I think he always knew. After he was gone, my mother changed. Not overnight, but slowly, like water eroding a riverbank. She stopped cooking. She stopped asking about my homework. She started sleeping on the couch with the TV on, and when I tried to crawl next to her, she'd push me away. "I need space, Mia," she'd say. "You're too much right now." I was 12. I didn't know what too much meant. I thought it meant I was too loud, too needy, too present. So I made myself small. I stopped asking for things. I made my own peanut butter sandwiches. I did my own laundry. I stopped crying at night because I didn't want her to hear me. None of it mattered. One Tuesday afternoon in November, she sat me down on the edge of my bed. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, blue, with flowers on it. She'd done her hair. She smelled like perfume, not the usual lavender she wore around the house. I remember thinking she looked pretty, and that made me nervous because pretty meant she was going somewhere. "Mia," she said, "you're going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while." "How long?" I asked. She looked at the wall behind my head. "A while." I was 12, but I wasn't stupid. I'd heard her on the phone late at night, whispering. I'd seen the new car in the driveway when I came home from school, a red convertible. My father's truck was still parked on the street, covered in leaves, but the red car was shiny and clean. Is it because of him? I asked. Her face tightened. "Don't." "Who is he?" She stood up. "Pack a bag. Just clothes. I'll get the rest later." I didn't pack. I sat on the floor and stared at my shoes. She packed for me. Jeans, t-shirts, my favorite hoodie, the one my dad bought me that said "Future Contractor" on the front. She threw everything into a garbage bag. Not a suitcase. A black garbage bag. That was the first time I knew she wasn't coming back. My grandparents lived 40 minutes away in a small town called Ashland. They had a yellow house with a porch swing and a garden full of tomatoes. My grandfather, Walter, was a retired bus driver. My grandmother, Irene, worked at the library. They were good people, but they were old. They didn't know what to do with a grieving 12-year-old who stopped talking for 3 months. The first week, I called my mother every night. She answered twice. The first time, she said, "I'm busy, Mia. I'll call you tomorrow." She didn't. The second time, a man answered. He said, "Evelyn can't come to the phone right now." His voice was flat, unfriendly. I hung up and never called again. I found out the truth from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, who still talked to my grandparents. My mother had met a man named Russell, at a bar 6 weeks after my father died. Russell owned a chain of car washes. He was divorced, no kids, and he'd made it clear from the beginning that he didn't want to raise someone else's child. He told my mother it was him or me. She chose him. I remember sitting on the floor of my grandparents' spare bedroom, pressing my forehead against the wall, trying to make sense of it. How could a mother choose a man she'd known for 6 weeks over her own daughter? How could she look at me, at the daughter my father had loved so much, and just throw me away? I didn't have an answer. I just had a hole in my chest that never closed. For the first 2 years, I held on to hope. I thought maybe she'd show up at my school play. Maybe she'd send a birthday card. Maybe she'd realize she made a mistake. But the birthdays came and went. I turned 13, 14, 15. No calls, no letters, no emails. My grandparents tried to talk about her once or twice, but I shut it down. It hurt too much. By the time I was 16, I stopped hoping. I stopped checking the mailbox. I stopped jumping when the phone rang. I focused on school, got a job at a diner, and started saving money. My grandparents did their best. Irene taught me how to sew. Walter taught me how to change a tire. They showed up to my parent-teacher conferences. They came to my choir concerts. They weren't my parents, but they were something. They were steady. I graduated high school with a 3.8 GPA. I got a partial scholarship to the community college in the next town over. I was studying business administration, working 30 hours a week at the diner, and living with my grandparents to save money. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I had built it myself. Then, 3 weeks ago, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. It was a local area code, but not one I knew. I almost didn't answer. I was in the middle of studying for a final. But something made me pick up. Mia. I knew the voice immediately. It was thinner than I remembered, tired, but it was her. It's your mom. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in the middle of my room, holding the phone, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. Mia, are you there? What do you want? My voice came out harder than I expected. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was nervous, shaky. I just wanted to hear your voice. It's been so long. 8 years, I said. It's been 8 years. I know. I'm so sorry. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall. But I didn't. I stood there like a statue, waiting. Can we meet? She asked. Please. Just once. I'll explain everything. I told her I'd think about it. Then I hung up and cried for the first time in years. I didn't tell my grandparents. I didn't tell anyone. I spent 3 days turning over in my head, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to see her just to tell her off. Part of me wanted to pretend the call never happened. But the biggest part of me, the part one hated, was curious. I wanted to know why. After 8 years, I deserved to know why. We met at a coffee shop in the town where she used to live. I got there early and sat in the corner, watching the door. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked old. Not 44. She was 44 now, same as my mother would have been, but old. Her hair was gray at the roots, and she'd lost weight in a way that didn't look healthy. Her clothes were cheap, wrinkled. She was wearing sneakers that had a hole in the left toe. She smiled when she saw me. Mia, you look so beautiful. I didn't smile back. Sit down. She sat across from me, folding her hands on the table like she was in an interview. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I stared at her. She stared at her hands. Russell left me, she finally said. There it was. 3 months ago, she continued. He met someone younger, someone who could have kids. I knew about the kids. My grandparents had mentioned it once, years ago, after my mother married Russell. she'd tried to get pregnant. Multiple rounds of IVF. None of them worked. Russell had wanted a biological child, and when it became clear it wasn't going to happen, he started pulling away. My grandmother said he'd been having an affair for at least 2 years before he finally left. "I'm sorry," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it, not because I felt bad for her, but because I knew what it was like to be abandoned. I knew that pain. I just didn't know if she deserved my sympathy. "I have nowhere to go," she said. "I've been staying in a motel, but I can't afford it much longer. I don't have any money. Russell took everything. The house, the cars, the bank accounts. I signed a prenup like an idiot. I waited. I know I don't have a right to ask you for anything," she said, "but I was hoping maybe we could start over. Just talk, see each other. I've missed you so much." I felt something twist in my chest. Anger, mostly, but underneath it, something else. Something that sounded like the 12-year-old girl who used to sit by the phone. "You didn't miss me," I said. "You miss having someone who had to love you." Her face crumpled. "That's not fair." "Fair." I laughed, and it came out bitter. "You left me with a garbage bag. You didn't even pack a suitcase. You chose a man who didn't want me, and when he left you, you came crawling back. That's not love. That's convenience." She started crying. Real tears, I think, or maybe she was just good at faking it. I couldn't tell anymore. "I was in a dark place," she said. "After your dad died, I couldn't think straight. I was drowning, Mia. I didn't know how to be a mother and a widow at the same time. So you stopped being a mother altogether." She didn't have an answer for that. I stood up. "I'm sorry your life fell apart. I really am, but I'm not your backup plan. I'm not your second choice. You made your decision 8 years ago. You don't get to unmake it just because you're lonely." I walked out. She didn't follow. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, she started calling again, and texting, and leaving voicemails. At first, I ignored her, but then she showed up at my work. I work at a diner called the Rusty Spoon. It's not fancy, but the tips are good, and my boss, a guy named Frank, is decent. I was in the middle of the lunch rush, carrying plates, refilling coffee, the usual chaos, when I looked up and saw her standing by the hostess stand. She was wearing the same clothes as before, same hole in her shoe. She looked smaller somehow, like she'd shrunk. "Mia," she said, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "Please, I just need to talk to you." I set down the plates. "You need to leave. I'm your mother. You gave up that right 8 years ago." A table of old ladies turned to stare. One of them whispered something to her friend. I could feel my face getting hot. "Please," my mother said again. "I'm begging you." Frank came out from the kitchen. He's a big guy, bald, with a beard that makes him look like a biker. "Everything okay, Mia?" "No," I said. "This woman is harassing me. I need her to leave." My mother's eyes went wide. "Harassing? I'm just trying to talk to my daughter." Frank looked at her, then at me. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." She didn't move. She just stood there, crying, while the whole restaurant watched. Finally, Frank took her by the elbow and walked her to the door. She went without fighting. But she looked back at me over her shoulder, and the expression on her face wasn't sad anymore. It was something else. Something harder. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of her arm. There was a bruise on it, dark purple, almost black, shaped like fingers. "Look what you did," the message said. "You assaulted me. I'm going to the hospital." I stared at the photo for a long time. I hadn't touched her, not at the diner, not at the coffee shop. The only time I'd touched her was 8 years ago, when I was 12, and she'd hugged me goodbye. That bruise wasn't for me. I didn't respond. The next day, she sent another photo. This time it was her neck, a red mark like a rope burn. Then a message, whiplash. The doctor says I might need physical therapy. I still didn't respond. Then the demand started. She wanted money, $5,000, she said, to cover her medical bills. If I didn't pay, she'd go to the police. She'd file a report. She'd tell them I pushed her at the coffee shop, that I'd been violent, that I'd been harassing her for years. I couldn't believe it. This was the woman who had abandoned me, the woman who had chosen a man over her own child, and now she was trying to extort me. I called my grandparents. Irene answered on the second ring. She's been calling us too, my grandmother said. Her voice was tired. She says you attacked her. We told her we didn't believe it, but she won't stop. She's lying, I said. I never touched her. We know, sweetheart, we know. But knowing didn't help. My mother started calling my friends, my co-workers. She even called the community college and left a message at the financial aid office, claiming I was a danger to myself and others. It was a lie, of course, but it was a lie that could have real consequences. I started looking into legal advice. A friend of a friend knew a paralegal who did pro bono work. She told me to document everything, save every text, every voicemail, every photo. If my mother actually filed a police report, I'd need proof that she was lying. But the police report never came. After 2 weeks of threats, she stopped. I found out later from my grandmother that she'd tried to find a lawyer, but no one would take her case. She didn't have any evidence, just a bruise she couldn't explain, and a story that kept changing. I thought maybe she'd given up. I was wrong again. Last week, my grandmother called me with news that made my stomach drop. My mother had moved in with them. She showed up on the doorstep. Irene said, crying, said she was going to be homeless. What were we supposed to do? You were supposed to say no, I said. She's my daughter, Mia. She abandoned her daughter. There was a long pause. I know, my grandmother said quietly, but she's still my child. I can't just let her freeze on the street. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to Ashland and shake some sense into them. But I knew it wouldn't matter. My grandparents were good people, and good people got taken advantage of. That's just how the world worked. For the first week, my mother played nice. She helped with dishes. She watered the garden. She told my grandparents she was looking for a job, though she never actually applied anywhere. Irene said she seemed different. Walter said he wasn't so sure. I stopped visiting. I couldn't risk running into her. Instead, I called my grandparents every day, and every day I heard a little more of the story. My mother was sleeping on the couch. She was eating their food. She was borrowing money for gas, even though she didn't have a car. Then, last night, everything fell apart. I got a call from my grandfather at 11:30 p.m. Walter never calls that late. When I saw his name on the screen, my heart started pounding. She's gone, he said. What do you mean, gone? She took the car, and Irene's jewelry box, and the envelope of cash we had in the kitchen drawer for emergencies. I sat down on my bed. She robbed you. Looks that way. Walter told me what happened. My mother had been drinking. They'd found empty wine bottles in the recycling bin, though neither of them drank wine. She'd been acting strange all day, pacing around the house, making phone calls in the backyard where they couldn't hear. Then, after they went to bed, she'd taken the keys to their old sedan and driven off. They didn't even hear her leave. I'm sorry, I said. I'm so sorry. Not your fault, Walter said. We should have listened to you. I didn't say, I told you so. I wanted to, but I didn't. Instead, I told them to call the police, which they'd already done. Then I told them I'd be there in the morning to help them sort things out. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my mother, about the woman who had once tucked me into bed and read me stories, about the woman who had left me with a garbage bag, about the woman who had tried to extort me and then rob her own parents. I didn't know which one was real. Maybe all of them were. This morning I drove to Ashland. The police hadn't found my mother yet, but they had a description of the car and an APB out. My grandparents were sitting at the kitchen table when I arrived, holding hands like they were in a hospital waiting room. Irene had been crying. Walter looked 100 years old. "We're canceling the credit cards," Walter said, "changing the locks. She's not coming back here." I nodded. "Good. We should have listened to you," Irene said again. "You tried to tell us." "It's okay," I said. "You were trying to help." But it wasn't really okay. Nothing about this was okay. My mother had burned every bridge she had. She had no one left. And somewhere, deep down, I still felt sorry for her. Not because she deserved it, but because she was my mother. Because I remembered the way she used to smell like lavender. Because I remembered the way she'd sing off-key in the car, just to make me laugh. I hated that I still remembered those things. The police called while I was there. They'd found the car abandoned behind a gas station 30 miles away. No sign of my mother. The jewelry box was empty. She'd pawned everything, probably. The cash was gone. The car had a flat tire and a dent in the passenger side door, like she'd hit something. They hadn't found her yet. Maybe they never would. I stayed with my grandparents for the rest of the day. We changed the locks. We called the bank. We made a list of everything that was missing. It wasn't a long list, but it didn't have to be. The damage wasn't about the stuff. It was about the trust, the hope, the stupid, stubborn hope that people could change. My grandmother made dinner, meatloaf, my favorite, and we ate in silence. Afterward, I sat on the porch swing with Walter, watching the sun go down. "You know," he said, "when your dad was alive, he used to tell me that you were the best thing that ever happened to him." I looked at my hands. "He'd be proud of you," Walter said. "The way you've handled all this. The way you built a life for yourself." "I don't feel proud," I said. "I feel tired." "That's okay. Tired is allowed." We sat there until the stars came out. Then I hugged my grandparents goodbye and drove home. I don't know where my mother is. I don't know if she'll ever come back. Part of me hopes she won't. Part of me hopes she will, just so I can look her in the eye and tell her that I'm done, that I'm not her daughter anymore, that she gave up that right a long time ago. But mostly, I just want to move on. I want to finish school. I want to find a job that doesn't involve carrying plates. I want to fall in love and have children and never, ever make them feel like they're too much. I want to be the mother my father thought I could be. That's the only thing I'm sure of anymore.